As Doctor Who prepared for its colour debut in 1970, the programme faced several threats to its survival. The solution was found by substantially altering the format it had enjoyed for the previous 6 years. For the foreseeable future, there were to be no trips through time and space to distant worlds or futuristic eras. The intergalactic wanderer would find himself firmly earthbound, exiled by his people to a near-future England where he would assist humanity in confronting extraterrestrial invasions, formerly employed as a scientific advisor to the powers that be. This proposed format would require more than just the usual brave companion to accompany the Doctor and be the audience surrogate. A character would be needed to personify the establishment to whom the Doctor's expertise was now yoked. The result was to become one of the most enduring characters the show has ever seen. In late 1968, producer Peter Bryant and script editor Derek Sherwin, who was due to succeed Bryant as producer by year's end, were tasked with overseeing major changes to the production of Doctor Who. With the planned departure of the entire regular cast by the end of the season, the expense of preparing the programme to be filmed in colour, as had been mandated by the BBC for the majority of their output from 1970, and a fall in viewing figures, the production team were facing a triple threat to the continuity of the programme. A new Doctor and companion would be needed, alongside major cost-cutting measures that would inevitably affect the setting and ambition for the stories. The solution proposed by Sherwin was inspired by the earlier popularity of Nigel Kneale's Quatermass serials, an earthbound setting with the hero nobly facing down threats to the planet, whilst navigating a tangle of officialdom and bureaucracy. Much like the intrepid Quatermass's British rocket group, the new Doctor would need a base of operations and an organisation with which to be aligned. The Doctor had always been ably assisted by a string of companions since the programme's debut, the number of which had fluctuated, but this new paradigm would require a different sort of regular in the cast. Not a companion per se, but someone unique in the history of the programme, at once both superior to the Doctor in power and status, and yet inferior in wisdom and expertise. Fortunately, the moment had been prepared for. Season 5 story The Web of Fear had seen the Doctor defeat the evil machinations of the Great Intelligence once again, this time in modern-day London, with assistance from the military under the command of one Colonel Lethbridge Stewart, played by Nicholas Courtney.
In here, quick!
After the story proved popular with audiences and executives at the BBC alike, Sherwin penned The Invasion for the second Doctor's final season, where many of the former story's elements were reused, especially a military presence, now a specialist team named the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, or UNIT. Considering the discussions taking place about the programme's future at the same time the story was produced, it's clear that The Invasion was very much a dummy run for the new era. UNIT would need a commanding officer, and rather than reinvent the wheel, the decision was taken to again have Lethbridge Stewart, now promoted to Brigadier, handle the military side of things.
How nice to see you again, Doctor.
It's Colonel Lethbridge Stewart.
Brigadier now. I've gone up in the world.
If the story worked, Courtney could look forward to becoming a regular cast member in his own right. William Nicholas Stone Courtney was born in 1929 at the Anglo-American Hospital in Cairo, Egypt. The son of a British diplomat, Courtney experienced a shifting landscape during his childhood as his father's postings to various foreign climes meant that the family spent time in Kenya, France and Egypt. It was during his time at the English school in Cairo that the young Courtney discovered a love of acting, performing in several productions in a variety of roles. Moving to England following his schooling, Courtney had to undertake his compulsory national service, and so spent 18 months between 1948 and 1950 serving in a series of regiments in the British Army, including a posting to Germany, where he witnessed firsthand the devastation that had been wrought by the Second World War only a few years prior. Despite having no professional ambitions regarding military life, retaining the rank of private the entire time, Courtney's experiences taught him much about military discipline and the bearing and behaviour of the officers in charge. Following his demobilisation in mid-1950, Courtney made up his mind to pursue acting professionally, and following in the footsteps of his sister Susan, he applied and was accepted on a 2-year course at the Webber Douglas School of Dramatic Art in London. Following graduation, he spent several years in weekly repertory in various locations around the country before he settled in London with his first wife, where he began to be offered television roles, including in 1965 the role of Elaine, one of a group of dastardly villains intent on kidnapping a scientist on behalf of a foreign power in the enormously successful spy thriller series The Saint.
Who could have given her 3,000 francs, huh? The explanation is simple. She talked.
No, Alan.
For 3,000 francs, she opened her mouth to Simon Templar, and
No.
she talked.
No, I swear to you, I didn't do it. No, Alan.
But unfortunately, you haven't any brain at all.
Courtney came close to appearing in Doctor Who in the same year when he was considered for the part of King Richard I in The Crusade, which eventually went to Julian Glover.
You dare to flourish arms before your king.
The director of that story, Douglas Camfield, went on to helm the mammoth 12-part story The Daleks' Master Plan, and Courtney quickly found himself cast as the heroic but ill-fated space security agent Brett Vine, who teamed up with the First Doctor, Stephen and Katarina, to counter the threat of the Daleks.
Sir, will you shut up?
At least that stopped you arguing.
Well, upon my soul.
Now, look here, I don't care what happens to you, but I have got to warn Earth.
Yes, and you will have to do far more than that. If the Daleks are doing something drastic, then we have to stop the Daleks. Now will you shut up, sir?
After Vine's death at the hands of his unwittingly manipulated sister, Courtney didn't expect to return to the show anytime soon. Little did he know what fate had in store for him.
What's the plan then? I brought a load of explosives down from Holborn. I'm going to blow it and them with it.
In late 1967, Camfield had again been commissioned to direct a Doctor Who serial, this time starring Patrick Troughton. With the London Underground invaded by robotic Yeti and a deadly web-like fungus, the story required a number of military characters for the Doctor and his companions to encounter, valiantly attempting to halt the spread of the web, but sorely out of their depth. Camfield cast Courtney as another ill-fated hero, that of Captain Knight, who was destined to be cut down by the marauding Yeti in episode 4. However, David Langton, originally cast in the role of Knight's commanding officer, Colonel Lethbridge, pulled out of the production prior to the rehearsals, and Camfield asked for Courtney to take on the role of the Colonel, with Ralph Watson stepping in to fill Captain Knight's now empty boots.
Get back!
With his name expanded to Lethbridge Stewart and a stuck-on moustache to make him look a bit older than his 38 years, the character made his debut in the now sadly missing third episode of the story.
Well, before you begin this rapturous reunion, there are one or two questions I'd like answered. For a start, is there anyone else down here playing hide-and-seek?
Well,
Well, yes.
Better give the others a hand, Corporal.
A significant aspect of the Web of Fear is the whodunit subplot. Who will turn out to be controlled by the Great Intelligence, the saboteur hiding in plain sight whose actions lead to the deaths of several characters? Like a good Agatha Christie, the audience are offered many suspects over the course of the story, and this includes Lethbridge Stewart.
True.
On the other hand, of course, whoever is in league with the intelligence could still be amongst us here.
It's a fact of which I am uncomfortably aware.
Therefore, watching with the benefit of retrospect, knowing that the Colonel would go on to be a stalwart member of the regular cast, the character comes across as somewhat different to his later appearances, the need to make his motivations and actions suspect not really correlating with what we later learn of his noble and resolute personality.
Who's going to look after the civilians, sir?
I'd like you to stay behind and look after them, Captain Knight. Doctor's got work to do. Right, gentlemen, time to go.
He is sometimes impetuous and foolhardy, his assault on the Yeti in Covent Garden leading to the annihilation of the men under his command.
Colonel, what happened?
Gone.
not all of them.
All of them?
I said so, didn't I? All of them.
Get it! 3 of them, sir. Grenade!
Originally, he was written by Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln as somewhat straight-laced and fusty. With Douglas Camfield's recasting of the character and the addition of Stewart to his surname, alongside a Tam O'Shanter, it is clear that the director intended the audience to associate him with Lieutenant Colonel Colin Mitchell of the Argyll Highlanders.
They're smashing down the gate!
Nicknamed Mad Mitch, the officer had become somewhat of a media darling due to his actions commanding the reoccupation of the city of Aden by the 1st Battalion Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders to the accompaniment of 15 bagpipers playing Scotland the Brave the previous June. Despite some questionable actions, Mad Mitch's media representation as a hero, a figure who recalled the glory of Empire, made him a household name. Beyond his Scottish lineage, Lethbridge Stewart was clearly modelled on this popular figure, insofar as the idea of a British officer leading from the front, never asking his men to do what he would not. As mentioned earlier, the success of The Web of Fear and the prospect of change to the programme's format for what would be the Third Doctor's debut meant that a sequel of sorts was developed as a dummy run for Season 7. When Courtney was invited to return as now Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, the possibility of becoming a regular with an initial 2-year contract meant that the actor, who by now had 2 young children, was very keen for the invasion to be a success.
Yes, well, since the Yeti do, I'm in charge of an independent intelligence group that we call UNIT. That's United Nations Intelligence Task Force.
The Brigadier seems far more secure and competent in this story, as he now heads UNIT with his experience of the Yeti incident informing his clandestine operation investigating international electromatics.
I've been keeping a check on everyone going in that building. Your photographs were transmitted to this headquarters and I recognized you.
Well, what's so odd about people going into the building?
Oh, nothing odd about them going in. Trouble is, some of them haven't come out.
After his disastrous melee with the aforementioned Yeti, he and his men defeat the Cybermen, with a little help from the Doctor, far more ably, demonstrating how the inclusion of the military outfit would afford the incoming era the opportunity to feature action set pieces filmed on location on a regular basis, with the Brigadier bravely leading his troops into skirmishes with various alien threats.
Doctor, get down! Right, bazooka!
Courtney is immediately secure in the role, his national service experiences paying dividends in crafting a capable and authoritative leader.
Benton, listen. Try and make contact with your passengers again and get them to report in to me.
I'll try, sir, but I'm not sure which way they've gone.
Look, don't make excuses, Benton. This is a top priority alert. Out.
In fact, one of the real-life soldiers used to lend the story more authenticity asked his commanding officer if he should salute the actor when he appeared on the scene, a fabulous review of Courtney's performance with which he regaled the convention circuit for years afterwards.
Don't worry, Doctor. We'll get them back.
Thank you.
I hope.
1970 arguably saw the biggest shake-up to the series in its long history, with some doubting whether the gamble of exiling the Wanderer in time and space to a single planet and era would pay off. With the second Doctor exiting the show along with his companions in 1969, regenerating into the form of John Pertwee, the Brigadier is the only character who provides some continuity with the previous 6 seasons. Indeed, we spend the majority of the first episode following him recruiting the other regular of the season, Liz Shaw.
We're not exactly spies here at UNIT.
Then what do you do, exactly?
We deal with the odd, the unexplained, and living on Earth, or even beyond.
And dealing with the fallout of a series of meteorite landings.
Monroe, see that institute with live ammunition, will you?
Alongside his interrogation of a man who claims to be the Doctor with a different face.
Look here. Can you hear me? Who are you?
Don't you recognize me?
I'm positive we've never met before.
Oh dear.
In this way, the Brigadier eases the audience into what otherwise could have been quite a shocking transformation for the programme, providing some much-needed reassurance that the new format can work, with the previously itinerant hero now aligned with an organisation seen before and personified by Nicholas Courtney's stalwart and noble commanding officer. Season 7 firmly adheres to this new paradigm, offering up 4 stories that all revolve around UNIT's investigation of the inexplicable and the unexplained. In each, the Brigadier contributes support and gravitas to the Doctor's efforts to thwart the myriad threats they encounter. His presence also affords the opportunity to explore the Doctor's failure to succeed in full at times, the destruction of the Silurian base carried out by the Brigadier under orders angering the Time Lord, and revealing how the Brigadier can sometimes represent the fearful reactionary side of humanity, at odds with the idealist pacifism of the Doctor's character.
But that's murder. They were intelligent alien beings. A whole race of them. He's just wiped them out.
This is something that no doubt inspired Russell T Davies to explore a similar friction in the relationship between the Doctor and an authority figure that had previously been cordial.
Don't challenge me, Harriet Jones, because I'm a completely new man.
I could bring down your government with a single word. You're the most remarkable man I've ever met. But I don't think you're quite capable of that.
No, you're right. Not a single word. Just 6.
I don't think so.
6 words.
Stop it!
6.
Unlike the 10th Doctor's instant vengeful dismantling of Harriet Jones' career, however, his third incarnation chooses to forgive, if not forget, the Brigadier's genocidal tendency.
Who sent you here?
Nicholas Courtney always claimed that the final story of Season 7, Inferno, was his favourite, and it's clear exactly why. He got to play 2 characters. Specifically, the role of the alternate universe brigade leader who captures the Doctor with his fascist thugs and subjects him to brutal interrogation.
You're wasting your time, you know. I can stand a great deal of this childishness.
This is only the beginning.
Like the other alternates in this dystopian universe, the parallel Lethbridge Stewart is instantly recognisable as a villain, the eye patch motif familiar from so many villainous pirate captains of classic adventure stories, marking him as similarly piratical and wicked. This costume choice led to one of the more popularly repeated anecdotes of the production of this era that Courtney was encouraged to recount for many years on the convention circuit. During one particularly dramatic moment of recording, the actor in character turned to face his colleagues, including Pertwee, to discover that they were all wearing similar eye patches in an effort to disrupt the notably professional and unflappable Courtney.
What on earth are you doing in that get-up?
Keep quiet! You will find it unwise to be insolent.
By this stage, it was clear that the inclusion of UNIT and its commanding officer had proved successful with the public, giving the programme the shot in the arm that it had needed as the 60s drew to a close. Even though Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin's successors, Barry Letts and Terrence Dicks, were determined to return the exiled Time Lord to the many planets and epochs in time and space, the successful chemistry between the Brigadier and the Doctor was built on and consolidated in the following seasons, with the military hierarchy expanding to include other regulars such as Captain Mike Yates, and a more leading role for Sergeant Benton, all of whom, alongside the Doctor and his companions, comprised the UNIT family, with the Brigadier firmly in the position of father. Indeed, the Brigadier becomes more and more like the dependable dad, staid, uptight, and a little boring, but nevertheless reliable, stoic, and trustworthy, next to the flamboyance, eccentricity, and dangerousness of the Doctor's cool uncle character.
Look! It's working!
Nowhere is his resolve and courage under fire more apparent than in his efforts to rescue the Doctor and his companions trapped inside the deadly heat barrier thrown up around the village of Devil's End in 1971 classic The Demons. After spending the majority of the story determinedly infiltrating the barrier, the Brigadier finally faces down the evil animated gargoyle Bok with characteristic British understatement and wry irreverence.
Yes, I see what you mean. Never mind, we'll soon fix him. Jenkins? Yeah. Shut for the wings there. 5 rounds rapid.
After 5 episodes of supernatural shenanigans, the Brigadier's decision to enjoy the local hostelry instead of engaging in the festivities of that other great European tradition, May Day, always brings a smile to my lips, and is a superb example of why the character is such a firm favourite to this day.
Fancy a dance, Brigadier?
It's kind of you, Captain Yates. I'd rather have a pint.
Indeed, his unruffled and sceptical perspective is called upon often to inject some deadpan humour to stories which are otherwise fantastical. His statement after being transported to Omega's planet trapped within an antimatter universe, ad-libbed in rehearsals by Courtney himself, that
I'm fairly sure that's Chroma.
acts as an amusing fourth-wall-breaking nod to the audience concerning what had become traditional filming locations for a wide variety of BBC productions.
Doctor, I forbid you to go off in that contraption. There's no telling where you'll finish up. Remember what happened to you on Metebelis 3?
As the Pertwee era continued, the Earth-based stories became fewer, with therefore a reduced number of outings for Briggs' army, while the Doctor and companion began travelling in space and time once more.
Goodbye, old chap.
It is fitting, however, that the Brigadier gets the final line of the Pertwee era, delivering a quintessential summary of the miraculous regeneration of the lead into his 4th incarnation.
Well, here we go again.
The opening story of the new Tom Baker era acts as somewhat of a last hurrah for the Unit family, the perceived need to ease the audience into the new incarnation, meaning that Terence Dicks penned probably the most conventional Pertwee-era narrative, which highlights the new Doctor's variance with his immediate predecessor.
And I mean, you are still Unit's scientific advisor, remember? Well, you can't go rushing off and leave them in the lurch.
Can't I? Goodbye.
At times, the Brigadier, always on the back foot around his scientific advisor, is now having to act almost as carer and chaperone for the manic and seemingly unhinged Fourth Doctor.
Don't you like them? UNIT is supposed to be a security organization. Do you think I might attract attention? It's just possible. One moment.
His presence, more so than that of official companion Sarah Jane, acts as an excellent sounding board, affording Baker the opportunity to truly delineate his new, most popular personality.
Doctor, I have every respect for your concern for ecology, but really, one squashed dandelion...
Not just squashed. Flattened. Almost pulverized.
But, with the Doctor's itchy feet throughout this story, it is clear that the writing was on the wall for the Unit family. The Brigadier's final story as a regular came the next year in 1975's Terror of the Zygons, where we came full circle to his Scottish lineage as the team faced down the sinister shapeshifters by the shores of Loch Ness.
Anyway, it's nice to see you again, Brigadier.
And you, Miss Smith.
I didn't expect to see you in a kilt.
My dear Miss Smith, as you'll remember, my name is Lethbridge Stewart. The Clan Stewart.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were doing a doctor.
An absurd idea.
Despite its place in lore as one of the greats, Terror of the Zygons was not an entirely happy experience for Courtney. During the production, he had become convinced that this would be the last appearance of a character he had loved playing for the previous 7 years. After Pertwee had moved on, and with a new production team, he was certain that there was no longer a place for the Brigadier in future adventures.
Did they have return tickets?
Yes, I imagine so.
You should have taken them and got your refund, man. I thought you were a Scotsman.
Fortunately, his prediction was not entirely accurate, but it would be another 8 years and another regeneration of the lead before he would don the moustache once again. 1983 saw the 20th anniversary of the programme, and producer John Nathan Turner was set on having each story of that season see a returning element from the long history of the programme. The third story, Mordrin Undead, was to see original Hartnell companion Ian Chesterton, played by William Russell, return to the programme. But when the actor proved unavailable, his role was switched to that of the Brigadier, now retired from UNIT and teaching maths at Brendan Public School.
In 30 years of soldiering, I've never encountered such destructive power as I have seen displayed here and now by the British schoolboy.
The slight incongruity of this development is somewhat glossed over during the story, but Courtney's presence is most welcome.
No, Brigadier, get out of here!
What do you think you're doing?
His dual role as two versions of the same character from different time periods, affording the actor the opportunity to demonstrate a range denied to him in earlier years, displaying the vulnerability of a man personally affected and wounded by his association with the Doctor.
I don't scare quickly, Doctor. Nor do I succumb easily to brainwashing techniques.
No, of course not. Sir, there was a way of tracing how far back the inhibition goes. You could perhaps get some treatment.
Treatment? Treatment? There's nothing wrong with me, Doctor.
Well, no.
A1, always have been.
Absolutely.
I suppose you've been talking behind my back with Dr. Runciman.
Brigadier.
Oh, well, there's loyalty for you. Well, it's no good. I'm not taking my leave of the funny farm. There's nothing wrong with me, I tell you. Fit as a fiddle. Always have been.
When it came time to produce the feature-length special of that same year, The Five Doctors, Nathan Turner was keen to cast Courtney once more, this time from a slightly earlier period in the Brigadier's life, enjoying one more adventure with the Doctor on the day of his retirement from UNIT.
Oh, thank you.
Brigadier. Good heavens!
This story is notable for many reasons, not least the fact that it was the first time Courtney finally got to sport a real moustache. But the decision to team him up with Troughton's second Doctor was a stroke of serendipity that really makes it special for me. Originally paired with Pertwee, changes to the availability of different actors resulted in the alteration, so that he accompanies the first incarnation he had originally met all those years before.
And who is this?
It's Colonel Crichton, my replacement.
Yes, mine was pretty unpromising, too.
Come along, Doctor. We'll take a stroll round the grounds, shall we? Awfully sorry about this. Do excuse me for a moment.
You've had this place redecorated, haven't you? Don't like it.
Come along, Doctor.
This leads to some great back and forth, allowing Courtney to be an excellent straight man to Troughton's comic cosmic hobo.
Who unto Massillon's tower would go, must choose above, between, below.
You in pain, Doctor?
Age has not mellowed you, has it, Brigadier?
Lethbridge Stewart would make one further return of the classic era in 1989's Battlefield, where his anomalous time as a teacher was ignored and his character given a far more fitting retirement, finally provided with a domestic life promised way back in the Third Doctor's era.
You could have said no.
I could have, Doris, but I still have my duty.
And called upon by UNIT to assist once more in the defence of the planet, alongside his successor Brigadier Bambera and the Seventh Doctor.
I just can't let you out of my sight, can I, Doctor?
Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart. So you recognise me then?
Yes. Who else would it be?
Little man, what do you want of me?
Get off my world.
It was originally planned for the Brigadier to perish in the dramatic climax with the demonic destroyer, and despite the character getting a suitably triumphant final line in the confrontation,
Pitiful. Can this world do no better than you as the champion?
Probably. I just do the best I can.
writer Ben Aronovich opted to have him ultimately survive the duel, living to fight another day.
You stupid, stubborn, thick-headed numbskull! You're supposed to die in bed. I could have handled it. Your jaw.
Nonsense, Doctor.
You're supposed to be dead.
Oh, really, Doctor? You don't think I'd be so stupid as to stay inside you?
Well...
Really, Doctor, have a little faith.
With the cancellation of Doctor Who at the end of that same season, it looked increasingly unlikely that that day would ever come. As noted elsewhere in this series, however, fan interest in the programme only seemed to grow the longer the programme was off the air, and several official and unofficial projects were keen to secure Courtney's involvement whenever possible as the 90s progressed. Courtney reprised his role of the Brigadier in his prime UNIT family days in 2 BBC radio dramas starring John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen, helmed by former Doctor Who producer Barry Letts, as well as finally featuring alongside 6th Doctor Colin Baker in the charity special Dimensions in Time, produced to mark the 30th anniversary in 1993.
I'm finding it very difficult to keep up with all of you these days, Doctor.
Another notable production from the so-called wilderness years was a leading part in the 1995 spin-off film Downtime, one of several straight-to-video films produced by Real-Time Pictures, featuring friends and foes of the Doctor. Penned by the writer of 1989's Ghostlight, Mark Platt, and directed by Doctor Who veteran Christopher Barry, Downtime is one of the better examples of the period's copyright-skirting fan productions.
Look, I still don't know what New World wants these people for.
Afraid of unearthing a scandal?
Acting as a sequel to The Web of Fear, the cast features both the Brigadier as well as Deborah Watling's Victoria Waterfield and Sladen's Sarah Jane Smith after their time adventuring with their respective incarnations of the Doctor, having to once more face the sinister machinations of the Great Intelligence and its army of Yeti.
What happened to your faith, old man?
Huh? I saw your light of truth, that's what. And I'll put a stop to it.
More intruders, as anticipated. Travers? You're still my closest instrument.
Considering the budget limitations and time available, the film is a fun little romp and is particularly notable for the elaboration of Lethbridge Stewart's family situation and the resultant effect this would have on the main programme when it eventually returned.
Perhaps you should get off that boat.
It's not the boat, it's them.
And me too.
Well, army families get to live together, so why didn't we? Was your career that important?
Expanded upon in much more detail in the accompanying novel, we learn that the Brigadier had divorced from his first wife during the Pertwee era due to his work commitments and the need for absolute secrecy over his responsibilities. The fallout from this broken relationship leads to the estrangement of the Brigadier's daughter, named Kate, who was raising her son alone whilst fending off the pursuit of the Intelligence's agents in their efforts to ensnare her father.
He'll be 5 next week.
Grandson. My grandson. I never dreamt. Good Lord.
Gordon. Gordon James, after you.
It is through the events of this experience that Kate learns the truth of her father's involvement with UNIT and the wider context of alien infiltration of the planet. As the turn of the century approached, and after the failed reboot of the programme in the form of 1996's TV movie, it seemed more unlikely than ever that Doctor Who would return in the familiar form of a television series. The founding of audio production company Big Finish came about when a group of fans turned professionals who had been involved in several unofficial productions in the 90s decided that it was time to take the reins themselves as much as was possible. First, however, they needed to prove to the BBC that they had the skill and resources to produce dramas of a standard suitable for one of the corporation's most lucrative brands. They therefore set about adapting several of the novels featuring prose companion Bernice Summerfield and ensuring that as many former Who actors were cast as possible. Courtney was secured to portray the part of Wolsey the cat, as the intrepid archaeologist finds herself transposed to a pantomime reality, and played the role with evident relish.
Have it, you foul fiends! Master Dick!
Fact! The newcomer is unarmed! Command! Get her!
We obey! Oh, crook, so I am. Ha-ha! Stop or be atomized!
But, Master Dick, that's just a frying pan.
Observation! The frying pan is not an offensive weapon!
Sorry, I see what you were trying to do now.
Command! Get her!
We obey! I can be hurt! No, so I'm not dead! Oh, bugger, I can be hurt.
This could be it. They're going to charge us. Hold on to me, Dick.
I beg your pardon?
The production acted as an excellent example of the level of quality and finesse Big Finish could offer with a hoped-for Doctor Who range. When the BBC granted the nascent company the license to do just that, the team were keen to cast Courtney again, this time in the role for which he was most associated, and in a story that would finally address the gap left by failing to properly team the Brigadier with the Sixth Doctor. The resultant The Spectre of Lanyon Moor suitably scratched this itch of fandom with a great spooky tale of Cornish myth and legend in the tradition of the classic The Demons and Terror of the Zygons.
So what's UNIT's interest in this survey?
Well, Doctors, back in 1940, Lanyon Moor was occupied by the Royal Navy for use as a radar observation post.
Mm-hmm.
They put up huts on the hill, but they had to abandon the site within a couple of months.
Why? What happened?
Well, for one thing, the radar equipment was completely useless. Everything was permanently scrambled. Chaps from the War Office came down, experts and so forth, but they couldn't get to the bottom of it.
What else?
There was some sort of wave of mental illness among the men. Seems people were just losing their marbles, wandering off onto the moors. One poor fellow even went over a cliff and ended up in pieces at the bottom.
When 8th Doctor Paul McGann was convinced to join the company to produce an ongoing series of adventures, the writers knew there was a similar checklist of meetings and confrontations to further legitimise what had been his blink and you'll miss it incarnation. Alongside Daleks and Cybermen, this of course meant that the Brigadier would need to meet the current Doctor, and the finale of the first series of 8th Doctor adventures did just that with Minuet in Hell, where the two team up to face down the fear-feeding Psionovores.
Well, Brigadier, here we are again.
Yes, indeed. Every time I think I've seen the last of you, up you pop again. I like the new face, by the way. See if you can't hold on to it a little longer than some of your predecessors. There's a good chap.
It's always a pleasure teaming up with you. Someone dependable, solid as a rock.
You too, Doctor. You too.
Courtney also went on to portray an alternate universe version of the Brigadier as part of the 40th anniversary Unbound series of plays, where a divergent Third Doctor encounters the old soldier living in the Hong Kong of 1997 after having to face the threats of the Pertwee era alone, without his scientific advisor, leading to self-imposed exile and disgrace, scathingly summed up by the criticisms of his successor, Colonel Brimacombe Wood, portrayed by David Tennant just prior to his time as the 10th Doctor.
That feeds on evil thoughts.
Oh, I don't believe all that paranoid, paranormal rubbish.
You are a serving officer in UNIT. Open your eyes. This is what your job is about.
I don't know what it was, but it was here at the end of the Opium War when this monastery was established.
Don't try pulling rank on me, Brigadier. Your open mind is what got you fired.
I saved lives.
If we could perhaps
remember the Daily Mail, huh? Barmy Brig in fake flower fiasco.
Those flowers were plastic. Couldn't you see how dangerous that made them?
Please.
You're a joke. Every time you ran security at a peace conference, somebody get killed.
Right, that's it.
Be quiet, both of you.
At the end of this story, the alternate Brigadier finally becomes a fully fledged companion, departing Earth for adventures alongside David Warner's Doctor that was sadly only expanded upon in one further release.
Hold on, I know that lot.
When Doctor Who triumphantly returned to television in 2005, and with UNIT featuring briefly quite early on in Series 1 two-parter Aliens of London World War III.
United Nations Intelligence Task Force, good people.
How do you know?
Does he's worked for them?
It was thought that it would only be a matter of time before we would again see the Doctor's most stalwart of supporters leading from the front once again. Alas, it was not to be.
Times like this I could do with a Brigadier. No offence.
None taken. Sir Alistair's a fine man, if not the best. Unfortunately, he's stranded in Peru.
Despite being name-checked a number of times during the Tennant era, Courtney was not destined to reprise the role on screen in the main programme again.
With respect, Sir Alistair, UNIT has had to adapt to the challenges of a more hostile universe.
In my day, we took on Daleks, Cybermen, Autons, Zygons, and all manner of space thuggery. And it doesn't get more hostile than that.
No, Brigadier, you're so right. It doesn't.
Sarah Jane Smith.
Fortunately, the Brig did get to enjoy one last hurrah in Series 2 of spin-off show The Sarah Jane Adventures, where he assists the heroic reporter in infiltrating UNIT's Black Archive in her efforts to counter the latest threat from the evil cephalopodic Bane.
Stand down, Major Kilburn. That's an order.
You're retired, Sir Alistair. Have you forgotten? Hands on your heads! All of you!
Major!
Do as he says, Brigadier.
Although not taking as much of a leading role in the story as I would have liked, and lacking a satisfying farewell, it was great to see the Brig back in action one last time.
Bye, Sarah Jane.
A hoped-for reunion with the Doctor himself was planned for the following series of the Sarah Jane Adventures, where the 10th Doctor would go on to appear at Sarah Jane's wedding, but Courtney, now approaching a venerable 80 years old, sadly suffered a stroke ahead of production and could therefore not appear. This unfortunately marked a decline in the veteran actor's health, and after a long illness, he passed away in 2011 at the age of 81.
Hello, it's me. Get him. Tell him we're going out, and it's all on me except for the money and the driving.
When it came time to conclude the following season of Doctor Who, showrunner Stephen Moffat could not allow the great man's passing to go unmarked. With the 11th Doctor desperately trying to avoid what he believes to be his unavoidable death, he calls up the nursing home in which we learn that Lethbridge Stewart has been living, ready for a night out on the town.
Hello.
Doctor, I'm so sorry. We didn't know how to contact you. I'm afraid Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart passed away a few months ago. Doctor?
Yes.
He was very peaceful. Talked a lot about you, if that's any comfort. Always made us pour an extra brandy, in case you came round one of these days.
The revelation that the old soldier had passed on without the Doctor's knowledge both tragically reflects the missed opportunity of having them reunite on screen, and poignantly dispels the Doctor's recent shirking of responsibility when it comes to conforming to the fixed timeline in which he seems destined to die. It's bittersweet, but some heroes don't always get to go out in a blaze of glory, and the Brigadier's death serving as a reminder to the Doctor of his duty is a fantastic epitaph for the character, in my opinion.
It's time.
Please check assignment taping units.
Moffat was also sure to include another nod to the great man in the same story, this time to Courtney himself, by having the characters all sport special eye patch devices in order to avoid the amnesiac effect of the sinister silent creatures.
The death of time. The end of time. The end of us all. Oh, why couldn't you just die?
Dibby Bestera showed up. You just can't get the psychopaths these days.
A definite in-joke for fans, this little reference to the famous Inferno anecdote serves as a lovely tribute. But although Courtney was gone, this didn't mean that the great impact and importance of the Brigadier was destined to die out. The following season introduced, or rather reintroduced, Kate Stewart, now the leader of UNIT, influenced both by her father's mentorship and the example of the Doctor in changing the focus of the team towards a more scientific angle.
Don't despair, Kate. Your dad never did. Kate Stewart, heading up UNIT, changing the way they work. How could you not be? Why did you drop Lethbridge?
I didn't want any favours, though he guided me, even to the end. Science leads, he always told me. Said he'd learnt that from an old friend.
We don't let him down. We don't let this planet down.
The continuity of having a Stewart head up UNIT was a suitable tribute to the character, but unfortunately, this did lead to what I consider a misjudged coda to the Brigadier's story in Series 8 finale, Death in Heaven. Having thwarted Missy's evil plan to resurrect the dead of Earth as Cybermen, the Doctor is puzzled by the actions of a lone Cyberman apparently taking the responsibility of killing his arch-nemesis out of his hands.
You win.
I know.
It is here that we learn that this last remaining Cyberman is seemingly the Brigadier reborn. Despite the intention of having the character thereby become immortal and once more saving the day, after 2 episodes expounding on the living death of the consciousnesses trapped within Missy's so-called nethersphere and the tragic fate of Clara's love, Danny Pink, who suffers a similar fate, it's hard to see how the Brig ending up as an animated corpse, mutilated and stuck inside a steel prison is supposed to be a satisfying fate for the character.
Doctor, she's talking about her dad.
Of course, the Earth's darkest hour and mine. Where else would you be?
Despite this misguided farewell, the Brigadier continues to be a firm part of the Doctor Who mythos, with expanded media like the books and comics finding ways to add to his legend or address other gaps in his association with time and space's greatest champion. We've learnt further about his illustrious family with the addition of his grandfather Archibald in 12th Doctor finale Twice Upon a Time, with even a spin-off novel series about his exploits and a reincarnation of the character in audio form performed by the great impressionist and actor John Culshaw. It's never been clearer that just like the Time Lord, our own very earthly and distinctly British hero has a long life in him yet. And it's all down to Nicholas Courtney stepping out of the shadows in that underground tunnel all those years ago, sporting a stuck-on moustache and the firmest of upper lips.